Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which discusses any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Our show believes that women should be treated with respect at all times and in all places. Here's today's moderator, Ty Goodwin.
Hello and welcome to It's a Woman's World. I am your host today, Ty Goodwin, and we have an amazing special show today. We're going to be talking about transitions, and today we have our African American Women's Panel. So let me first start by introducing my co-host, Jamela Padford.
Yes, thank you, Ty. It's always wonderful co-hosting with you, and we always have such a great time. Thank you.
We do. And now I want to introduce you to our guest today. Our guest is Faith Dietz. She is a human resources professional. She is a youth advocate and a budding social entrepreneur. How are you, Faith?
I am great. I am so excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
I am so glad to be having this conversation. We are all mothers of daughters.
Yes.
And you know, we all have gone through the transition of helping them go from middle school to high school. I'm in the phase right now where my daughter's in high school, who is going to graduate soon. And we also want to take a look at transitions from another place. What happens after they get out into the world? What happens after we get out into the world? And what kind of transitions can we do? So I want to start the conversation by really talking about when we have our daughters that are in middle school, what can we do to help them with that transition from middle school to high school?
Well, I think one thing to remember is just to listen to what they're telling you, because they really have great ideas about what they're interested in, and making observations about what they're focusing on. So if they're focusing on art, if they're really good at art, or if they're focusing on, hey, I really like working on Dad's car, or or my uncle's car, or somebody's car, that may be where they're headed. Maybe they want to be a mechanic. Maybe they want to drive race cars. We just don't know. Let's not focus on what they can be in our eyes, but what they can be in their own dreams.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I find that the transitions are very different, because junior high was different than high school. As now my daughter is 21, that transition is a totally different transition from what it was those other two times. And so, yes, listening and transitioning, I think also for a mother into a navigator as opposed to someone who is trying to direct. And oftentimes I find myself saying now, what are you going to do about that? What is your plan? Let's kind of talk out your plan. And then I kind of fill in the holes of the gaps, or I'll say, this is what I hear you saying. Does that make sense to you? And oftentimes she's able to come to her own conclusions of, yeah, that didn't make sense. Okay. So what's the redirect, you know?
Right.
So you're absolutely right. Listening and letting them direct their own is very important. So, yeah.
Yeah, that can be really hard to do if you're kind of like a overprotective mom. I'm not saying any names at all, but you know, there's a fine line between guiding, like I love the word you use, navigating, and then setting boundaries.
Oh yeah.
You know, do you have any thoughts around how can you draw that fine line as a parent?
Well, actually, what we have done is to make contracts with our kids. So when they're getting cell phones, we create a contract. So what behavior do we want to see when we're using our phones, when we're using social media? That's really important. Our older daughter has her driver's license, so before she got her license, we said, okay, what's the contract?
Right.
How are you going to use the car? How are you going to let us know where you're going? If you're going to a different place, how are you going to communicate that? So they are part of the contract. We are not dictating what they're doing. We are asking them, so how do you think this should play out? So they have stake in it. And they follow it. So
Very good, very good. Yeah, and I found that the social media piece was huge for my daughter at that time, and I had to put serious boundaries and parameters around that because it was consuming It was all consuming for a while there, in which the studies were lacking, and there was a lot of bullying that was happening also as well. And so I found that I had to be a little bit of a snooper in the sense that I had to see what was going on, the level of engagement, the friend type, because at that time, you know, social media was really picking up, the Facebook was really picking up, and all of the other different apps that the children were getting into. And even the iPad that the school gives, I had to ask for them to put certain, you know, blockage and certain parameters around that, because it became a huge distraction in the transition. And as we know, we want our children to transition well, because the transition often has to do with the launching and how you launch into your own life and begin to live your best life.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and I still find that still can be a consuming, you know, issue, and that, you know, I still have those conversations of how are you spending your time when you're on social media? You know, what are you saying and what information are you giving when you're on social media? So those transitions, even in that socialism, is very important too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny that you say that, because that was in our contract. If you are bullying, if any of your friends are bullying, if they're being mean,
Yes.
you will lose your phone.
Yes.
And there were a couple times that she lost it.
Yeah.
And but she learned.
Yes. Oh yes.
She
Oh yeah.
learned. Oh,
Absolutely.
that's part of the contract. Yes, I messed it up.
Yep.
And so that was really, really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things I hear both of you saying is engagement, you know,
Yes.
with your child, but also consequences.
Yes.
You know, and I'm thinking of a world where we hear a lot of kids that have this sense of entitlement.
Oh yeah.
You know, I think those consequences can be really, really helpful
Yes.
in teaching, you know, teaching them.
Yeah,
Yep.
and needed, because, you know, when they are out in the world, we know as adults we can't do everything that we want to do. And I think that's the misconception of young people when they're in the home, is like, when I'm grown, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. Well, that's not the case, you know. And even I had to bring it down to some of the very smaller examples. The stoplights are rules. The lines in the middle of the streets are rules that we have to abide by. I can't just do what I want to do because I'm an adult. So there's rules that govern us, that are all around us, that you have to pay attention, and you can't say, well, I didn't know, you know, because those rules are everywhere. Yeah. So
Interesting. You know, one of the things that I've noticed is that, you know, when I was growing up, I was a latchkey kid. You know, latchkey, my parents worked, and so I was home alone. And so at an earlier age, I had a lot more skills. And sometimes I notice that the kids now, they don't know how to do as much.
they don't.
And so one of the things we've had a conversation about is my daughter feeling like she's not prepared. I don't know how to do anything. And so we've been focused on like cooking, right? Because otherwise she wouldn't know how to cook at 16 and 17. So I'm curious, what are some of the skills that we need to help our kids develop so that they will be prepared as they're transitioning from high school into the world?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because over the last about 20 years, I've seen a decline in just basic skills.
Yes.
So I tell my daughter, I take my daughter to a job fair, and I say, go up and you can talk to the person. Or go take your car to the tire place and have them put air in the tires. I can't do it. I can't do it. Yes, you can. So I found with our older daughter, walking through the actual item, whatever we want them to do, walking them through once so that they're comfortable has actually worked.
Yes, absolutely.
And with our younger daughter too, it's worked. They have to do it once, and then they go, oh, okay, that's what that is. Okay. So just basic skills, how to call up and make your doctor's appointment, because you're going to have to do that in a few years on your own. So doing those kinds of things, writing a check. We don't write checks that often, but occasionally we do have to write a check. This is how you write a check. Just making calls, going up to people and talking to them, asking questions. simple things that we take for granted.
Absolutely, and I think follow through. I think, you know, one of the things that I was working with my daughter, she had gotten a job when she was about 16, and, you know, just really following through. And when you have a schedule, you have your set work schedule, you don't get to do some of those fun things that might come up last minute as a teenager. Those things, you know, and you have to follow through on what it is that you said that you're going to do, you know, and really keeping after what your assignments are, you know, and being, if you want to be an adult, these are the adult type things that you're required to do. You know, my daughter loved to cook, so I never had to worry about that. I think what it was for me was, again, the follow through of cleaning up. So she loves cookbooks, so she would, you know, make all kinds of things, you know, use all of my butter and my flour and all this stuff, but we'd have tasty treats, but then I'd have a messy kitchen, you know, and so it was like, okay, so now that you've done all these tasty treats, now let's wash all these dishes and put them away. So it was just those types of follow through things, and you're very right. How do you assert yourself as a young person in a manner in which you are understood but taken seriously? And those are kind of those scarier things, you know, when mom has done it for all these years. How do I now do it? You know, and how do I take the reins of my own life and claim it as my own? You know, and I think that that's also a part of the transitions that we have to start allowing them to do. And even when we would have parent-teacher conferences and she had, you know, assignments or things she needed to make up, I would allow her when she was in high school to start asking these questions. And I would tell her before we went in, I'm going to lay back. You know what you need to do. This is your work. My work is taking care of you and doing all the things that I'm doing. Your job is to get those grades. And so now how do you ask your teachers, what do I need to do to get an A in this class? You start to ask those questions. So I would lay back and I would let her assert herself and ask these questions. And many times the teachers would tell me more than she wanted me to know. But that was also a part of the process, you know? So, yeah.
You bring up a really good point about empowering our daughters to have their own voice.
Yes.
You know, I found that with my daughter. We went to the store and she's got her bank card, and, you know, putting the card into the chip reader, and she was so worried about was she doing it right, and me not doing it for her, but just standing back and letting her do it and figure it out, and then open her mouth to ask a question, and letting her have her own voice and find it to speak up about different things, like you talked about with the taking her car to the shop. What other, you know, tips do you think that we should be giving our daughters so that they do step out with confidence when it's time for them to go out into the world?
Well, I think one of the items also that we don't really talk about too often, but we probably should, is how to be vulnerable in your space and how to be comfortable with that vulnerability. I often tell the kids, you got to own your stuff. And part of owning your stuff, when you mess up and saying, you know what, I messed up, is being a little vulnerable. And I have had to do it in front of them. And I make sure that they are there so they see that it can be done. So when you mess up, you say, you know what, I messed up and I'm really sorry. And you say sorry, and they see you doing that. And so they hopefully they get the message that it's okay to mess up. You know, we can tell them that it's okay, but when they see adults, they think, oh, you never mess up. But when they see us mess up and we own it and say, yes, I messed up, and they see us apologizing, whether it's to another person or even someone in the family, then they go, oh, it's okay to mess up. As long as I own it, and as long as I apologize if I need to or make corrections. And I think that's really something that we need to make sure that they're comfortable with. I mean, it's okay to mess up.
And one of the things I noticed too with that is the hygiene piece, the transitioning from I take care and I tell you to shower, I tell you to do your hair, I tell you to brush your teeth, I tell you to, you know, put your clothes in the wash, you know, I tell you to pick your room up. You know, there was a part of the contracts, you know, is we had created a calendar of certain things that needed to be done, and following that calendar and really making sure that, you know, she wasn't wearing the same clothes every day and that they were getting, you know, washed, or just making sure that she was keeping up with her hygiene, because as we know, when you transition from a little girl to a grown woman, there's different care that you have to provide for yourself.
Right.
And so just even how she kept the bathroom when she was done, you know, in the restroom, and how she kept that. And so that I find, you know, because I teach an after school program for a lot of my girls, and with that skills, a part of those skill sets is a lot of times I'm noticing is that our young girls are not learning those skills of how to take care of their bodies as their bodies are transitioning from the little girlhood into the grown womanhood. And I think that's very imperative about self-confidence and self-esteem. How do you take care of your body? And there was times where my daughter was wearing a ponytail that was just an unkept ponytail. And I was saying, honey, you know, what are we going to do with the hair? How are we going to do this? How are we going to work this out? You know, let's figure out, you know, some different hairstyles. Let's work out some different ways that you can work your natural hair. And as we know, as African American women, we have different type of textures of hair. And learning how to do your own hair before applying weaves or wigs or other type of pieces is very important to the self-confidence and the transition into the womanhood as an African American woman. Is how do you take care of your skin? How do you take care of your hair? And the proper hygiene that's associated with that.
Yeah.
That's true.
And
We're going through that right now with our younger girl. We went through it with the older one too, but
It's very important, you know, and it has a lot to do with how you feel about yourself, because if you don't feel good about yourself, you won't assert yourself in certain areas. You will remain in the background, or you'll have low self-esteem, or people will pick on you because you're not able to take care, or you're not learning how to take care in that way. And so that's also a part of the transitions. And even now, you know, as you know, my daughter's 21 years old, I've had to say certain times, okay, there's, you know, how are you taking care of yourself? Are you working out? Are you eating right? Are you making sure that you're not eating just the hot Cheetos and the other things, that you're getting a healthy diet, you know, because we want our children to live long. We want them to live healthy lives, you know, and that's also very important to their transition as well.
I think that's part of self-care.
It is.
And I think globally, women are struggling with self-care and realizing how big a part that plays in us feeling good about ourselves, in us feeling good about the relationships that we're in us having peace of mind. And so talking about that with our daughters is important. And you bring something up too about teaching.
Yes.
I think a lot of times, because of how fast kids get information, they think that they should already know it. And I was like, no, these are things that we get to teach you. And it's okay if you don't know. And because that's been a really interesting conversation in our house, is like, you're not expected to know all this stuff. You know, there's some teaching, and that's just part of how life is.
It is, absolutely.
I think that's true, but I think sometimes our schools are actually pushing them to be more of adults rather than
children,
rather than developing children. So, for instance, in high school, when you get to high school, they expect you to do everything on your own. Well, has your child reached out to the teacher? Has your child done this? Has your child done that? And I'm like, well, even if they've done it, sometimes they need a little support in what they're doing. So in one instance, I can say that, yes, I said, yes, they have reached out actually a couple times, and there still hasn't been a final decision on this. So that's why I'm following up now. So, so it's great that we want to help our young people into becoming adults. That's nice that we want to give them the tools, but we also have to support them through that, because they don't know everything.
They do not.
And they really need that support.
Absolutely.
So
And you're right when you say that our schools are teaching our children to grow up too fast, and they're often introducing them to things that we might not agree with in our home. You know, and that's why it's very important to really unpack those things with our children. What are you learning? What are some of the extracurricular activities? Oftentimes they'll have different things going on in the school that that our children might take, you know, part in that we are unaware of. And that's why it's just very important to allow those open lines of communication without judgment, to allow them the freedom to be able to speak their truth of what's happening, because you know, even, you know, a lot of my daughter's socialism at the school, a lot of the girls wanted boyfriends, you know, and just really going into that transition of wanting to have a boyfriend, you know, preparing for prom or preparing for Sadie Hawkins, or the different things that are going on and wanting to already be in a relationship, and you know, really letting her know that there's time for that.
Yeah.
However, you know, that's not what we're working towards in our home. You know, in our home, we're working towards really being, you know, educationally independent, and really working on who are you as a human being, as a person, independent of someone else, even your closest friends.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and finding that voice, finding their independence, and liking themselves, even if their friend changed up and wasn't their friend that day or the next day, or however that plays out, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
Those skills are really important. And, you know, I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about something that the school doesn't always do a good job of, is helping them with the educational piece. And I know that's something that you work with, is helping parents find some resources for their kids, whether they are looking at high school resources or even beyond high school. So what recommendations do you have for parents as they're, you know, because we don't all have to do it ourselves, but sometimes we don't know where to look. So what recommendations do you have for parents who are helping their kids at that level?
Well, I actually would back up to middle school, because there are even opportunities in middle school that a lot of families just don't know about. So ask your school, what are the opportunities here? And how does my child get involved in those opportunities? But outside of the school, there are lots of opportunities in the Twin Cities. Lots of internships and different, most of the internships are for 14 and up, but there are ways to get tapped into them. When I find out about the internships, I try to share them out with my local neighborhood connections. And I think that's, if we can build on that and being really intentional about sharing those opportunities with people that we know might be interested. Doesn't mean they're going to be interested. It doesn't mean that they even know how to do it. So if you know of an internship and you know how to fill out the forms and how to walk someone through that process, let's do it.
Let's do that.
Let's do it.
You're right.
Because making assumptions that, like, just Google it. Okay, well, now you've Googled it, but what happens after that?
Yeah.
How do you get the information? How do you fill out the form? I don't know how to fill out this form. I've never seen it. What's the process? What's the timeline? How does this all work? Just making assumptions that people know what to do, I think is a really disservice to communities in general, and to the youth that it's supposed to benefit.
Absolutely.
Can you give some examples of the types of opportunities or types of internships that are out there?
So there are, like, can I name organizations? So there's like Tree Trust. I encourage people to look into Right Track. And Step Up. Step Up is in Minneapolis, Right Track is in St. Paul. When that comes around, those come around, then they're open. I encourage people to look into those. 3M, and when you're in high school, 3M has an internship that a lot of people, I don't think, really know about. One of the things that happens is that a lot of the information gets communicated to the young people, right? And so they expect the young people to bring it home and to share. And And even if you tell a young person, like, we know this, like, go clean up your room. Go clean up your room. No, really, it's time to clean up your room. You know? So they're not going to remember that. And I think the communication lines have kind of broken down over the last number of years. I remember getting updates, weekly updates, and sometimes monthly updates about what was happening in schools from teachers. And I know that the teachers are focused on other projects and other things, namely testing and other things like that. But if we know as community members that there are opportunities out there, and we know that, for instance, they're using, in high school, they're using Navient, which is a tool that gives a lot of information about college and career readiness, about the trades, about different opportunities. But the information isn't getting to the families. So families really need to ask, like, what's happening this week on your iPad? Let's check it out.
Yeah.
What
announcements?
What announcements are coming out? And even it's funny that you say Schoology, because they're not using that as a tool to communicate with parents. So the information that gets put on Navient and gets put on the iPad isn't always coming to the families. So that's information. Those are opportunities. They're being communicated, but without the support from families, it's really difficult.
Now, would you say that civic engagement is also important? One of the things that I had my daughter doing is she was serving breakfast for the homeless, you know, and I had her working at a food shelf and stuff when she was in, you know, the early parts of high school, just to build character, just to help her to give back and to learn, you know, the importance of really building your community early, so that she knew, you know, that it's, you know, you're not just building yourself, but you're a part of a larger village. And I think that the civic engagement piece too, even if some of our children are not going into these internships, I think that parents can be creative in finding ways to have our children be civically involved, so that they know the importance of really building the community and socializing them in that way and building character.
Yes, and that's super important. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. But volunteering is really something that I grew up with.
Me too.
And I'm a Girl Scout leader, so I definitely have our girls do a service project. We definitely do service projects every year. But in general in our family, it's important to talk about that and know that, you know, these things happen in our community because there are lots of volunteers doing great work. And they don't get paid.
No.
It's just because they want to maybe they want a cleaner park, maybe they want a new playground for the park, maybe they want something else for the community, and it's really important to be involved in that. Yeah, that's absolutely important.
It is, and that helps our children to have a great transition. Because the more connections they make when they're young, those connections come back to be beneficial when they're older.
Absolutely.
What I love about what I'm hearing is that we're talking about a holistic approach.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not just school,
No.
right? It's the personal development, it's the social connections, it's the community involvement, and I think that helps our children become whole people.
It does.
Absolutely.
And then they grow out and contribute to a more whole society and a more whole community.
You got it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got it, Tassie.
Well, you know, we're at the end of our time. This has been so much fun.
This has been fun. This is great.
We'll have to have you come back and do a part 2 to talk about transitioning from adulthood and beyond.
Yes, that sounds great. I would be happy to.
That'd be great. Well, thank you for joining the conversation today. We hope that you learned and got some insight, and we hope that you will join us again. Thanks again for taking time to spend with us and watching It's a Woman's World.